to Insight, everyone. I'm Nnamdi Odipo, and thanks for joining us. On this episode, we take a look at how technological advances and ICT transformation have evolved workplace operations and how human activities in the workplace is expected to evolve with these changes. I'd also be speaking with an education, administrative and planning expert on the new guidelines issued by the Presidential Task Force, by extension the federal government, on the eventual reopening of schools. Elizabeth Omori is here and on standby for our regular segment. Elizabeth, what's your lineup for this episode?
Well, it's quite going to be an interesting one because we'll be talking about the Niger Delta region and the woman's perspective to solving some of its underdevelopment issues.
Great, indeed. Let's get started with the main discussion. One of many things that have become clearer to us, of course, occasioned by the changing times, is that change itself is inevitable. As organizations adopt new technologies, we're finding out that the jobs of the future are more digital, more multidisciplinary, and more data and information driven. How do we balance human and machine relationship as today's businesses evolve? I'm quite excited about my first guest. She's a US-based Nigerian who is an organizational transformation expert and consultant. She joins me via Zoom. Adora Nebo is the CEO, Chrysalis Consulting Limited, operating out of Massachusetts, USA. Welcome to Insight, Adora.
Hi. Nice to be here.
Yeah, I reckon we should begin with some of the changes we are already seeing in the workplace, considering the way automation technology, for instance, is being used in marketplaces today and its impact. Should we be concerned that human operation is being threatened by redundancy coming from the very exact and precise nature and performance of technologies? I guess we should begin with you telling me what typifies the future workplace.
That's an interesting question. You see, I find it interesting that people are still talking about the workplace of the future. I think the future is already here.
Indeed.
I think that when this future we've been speaking about for the past, maybe since 2013, I think that it's already here with us. We can already see what patterns that typify what we predicted about 5 years ago. So, and this is being driven largely by technology, disruptive technology, smart technology, large data, AI, crowdsourcing, things like that. So you find that a lot of organizations have started responding in different ways. And we can see organizations of today being doing certain things that are not characteristic of organizations of the past. Let me explain that a little further.
Please do.
Now, when you look at businesses today, you find that one of the most typical things is the idea of disruption. Now, disruption by itself simply means sort of an irreverence for existing value chains and existing processes. Okay. So what these organizations do is that they look at human problems and decide to solve it. So when you do that, you then create a solution using the technology that is available to you, irrespective of what was existing before. So organizations, traditional and legacy organizations, are facing disruption from people who are not typical of their industries or the spaces that they've occupied. So we're going to see a lot more of that. We're seeing what everybody likes to call exponential businesses. Yeah. Exponential businesses are businesses like Amazon, Facebook, businesses that use large data, use AI algorithms, crowdsourcing, and technology like that to create more products and more ways of connecting. So what they do is that they build like a large fan base, creating platforms that help people connect with them. They connect directly with human beings and not with other businesses necessarily. And when they do that, they create this opportunity to engage directly with their consumers, who then give them feedback, telling them what they want and then they create even more businesses. So we see them growing very fast and very quickly. There are predictions that the S&P, 70% of S&P 500 organizations will be, by 2025, are organizations that we've never heard of. Isn't that interesting?
It is indeed. Adora, I'll step in there and I'll say we're going to make these a lot more relatable so people get a better grasp of what we're saying. But it is apparent that technology and general changes in society are both influencing the changes we're seeing today in the workplace, right? I mean, if that is right. And also, these changes are inevitable, as we've said. Create a scenario for us to reflect and drive home the message of how exactly an issue, take climate change now, for example, and how that could easily cause changes in the workplace.
Okay, let me explain something. Let me give you a bit of context, and then I'll do that.
Okay, great.
First of all, I don't think that this is something that has never happened before in the world, right? This is like just another turn of an era, you know. So we've witnessed a lot of industrial revolutions. People say that this is the fourth industrial revolution. So we've seen the first one, which was characterized by mechanization, steam engines, you know, and it brought about a lot of changes because we now had trains and we could move produce from one place to the other a lot easier. And we had the second one, which was characterized by electricity, gas, and automobile. And people think that that was the most important and most impactful because we had cars. And then we had the third one, which was when we had nuclear energy and, of course, the computer, right? Okay. And now we have this industrial revolution, which is characterized by digital technology and the internet. So each time you have a transformation like this, each time the world turns, what happens is that it begins to affect how business is done because real changes have happened, such as the speed with which you can get your services and your products to the consumers, such as the channels that you're using, such as the emotional connection to your organization. So once you see work and beginning to change like that, or organizations beginning to change like that, of course, it affects how work is done. Okay. So processes change. Once processes change, you then begin to need new kind of skills. That is how it affects human beings. Okay. You then begin to need new kind of skills, new kinds of talent, new kinds of knowledge in order to meet what's happening in your environment.
I'll put that further in context by creating a scenario like I just asked you to.
Yes, so I'm going there. So if you look at organizations today, if you look at organizations such as Amazon, for example, I like to use Amazon because they're using a lot of robotics today. So they have in their warehouses, for example, what human beings used to do, such as stacking and packing and and hauling boxes, are all being done by computers today, right? If you think back in the past, and remember when we used to have a lot of typing pools before computers, right? Yeah. You go to a room and you see maybe 80 people in a room, and all of them are typists. Remember what computers did to typing jobs. And if you recall, how organizations decided to deal with the advent of computers was to create computer departments, and train a few people to be able to use the computer. But that didn't last very long because shortly after, we realized that computers were just tools for getting work done. So everybody now has a personal computer. There's hardly anyone who doesn't know how to use a mobile phone today. So this is how it starts to affect us as human beings and what we do every day at work and at home. I don't know if that kind of explains.
Well, it does. Adora, draw for me a correlation between, because I've heard you talk about transformation, you've talked about disruption. Draw for me a correlation between digital transformation and digital disruption in the workplace, and try to link that to someone like me, and how I could easily become either, what's the word for it, contingent or supplemental labor in a fast-growing organization.
First of all, I don't think that humans are going to be supplemental labor or contingent labor. I think the future of work, which is today, is still about people. I think it's about creativity. I think what's happening is that the kind of competence that is needed is switching, is changing. So
Okay.
it's actually more about what computers can do versus what humans can do, or what technology can do versus what humans can do. So if you think about the example I just gave you about typists and computers,
Yeah.
those typists remain in the workforce. We didn't fire them. What we did was that we upskilled them, or we
Exactly.
changed their skills.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So what is happening in this shift is that a lot of new skills are going to be learned. Now, how that affects the workforce is that people in the workforce will have the way we define careers and jobs will change. Careers will now be more focused on your ability to learn really quickly. Because one of the things that typifies the changes that are happening today is the fact that changes happen very, very rapidly. So now what it means is that you need to be able to learn fast. You need to be very creative. You need to have the ability to use your multidimensionalism. Now,
Okay.
what I mean by that is, as a recruiter, right, when you're recruiting, what you do is you basically have a job description, and then the person who's looking for the job will have a CV. Most of the times, people will write their CV to tailored to the kind of job they'd like to apply to. And what the recruiter does is that they look at the CV and they look at the job description and find a match. Increasingly, that's not enough anymore. Increasingly, we need to know more about you. Increasingly, we need to know about your ability to manage stress. We need to know about your philosophies. We need you to bring your whole self to work. So you no longer have a work brain and a home brain. You have a whole brain that you bring to work. Because we need that multidimensionalism, because the kind of problems that we need to solve today are now complex and multidimensional. So we need to know more about you. We need to know that whether you play the guitar, we need to know what you do for fun. That's why recruiters check out your Facebook profile, your Instagram profile, and things like that. This is becoming important because of the rapid changes and the kind of thinking that needs to be in the workplace today. You know, so that's how it affects the human being.
When I hear you making inferences, Adora, when I hear you making inferences such as in the future workplace, the careers will be built on new skills learned and acquired based on emerging gaps and needs, I wonder if there are jobs already at risk and or likely to be irrelevant, say, in another 5 or 7 years. If there are, give me a hint, Adora, and then go ahead to speak to specific skill sets likely to become most vital and whether they are needed now or in the nearest future.
I like to say this very simply. There's data that says that about 57% of the jobs that exist today are in danger of being automated, right? Are susceptible to automation. And when that happens, those jobs will no longer be relevant. However, the way I like to put it is, think about the job you do. If it is a job that is repetitive, right? If it is a job that I can break down to steps, so the tasks that this job involves can be broken down to step 1, step 2, step 3. It is in danger of being automated. So there are so many jobs like that. Any job that fit into that, and I don't think it's a danger. I just think that it changes the way you see your job.
Okay.
You know, for instance, there are talks about surgeries, for example, being automated, using robots to conduct surgery.
Very true.
Now, if that is happening, it still doesn't replace the emotive work that a doctor does. You see what I mean?
Yeah,
so
indeed.
There's the human bit, and there's and it still doesn't change the work, the creative work that the human would do. It still doesn't change the problem-solving work that the human will do. So it changes the way we think about the work we do. It changes how we do our processes, but it doesn't change the role of the human being.
In some quarters, digital transformation is actually seen as euphemism for modernization. And if we're talking about aligning changes in the workplace to optimize existing human capital within specific organizations, how should organizations in Nigeria now begin to adjust to the changes already here and prepare for those coming in terms of like spending and manpower development?
I find this a very interesting question because first of all, I've been privileged to do a lot of transformation work in Nigeria, especially as with regards to the digital transformation that's happening. And one of the first things that struck me was that most organizations were doing what I would call, they were doing digital. They were not being digital. So just like the same mistake we made 10 years ago, 20 years ago when we first encountered computers, was we created computer departments, computer companies, so to speak. But those things quickly faded away because we quickly realized that technology is a tool and not the end result. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so,
indeed.
just the same with digital. Digital is a tool and not, it's a language you speak, it's a tool, it's a medium, it's not the end result. It's not the problem, it's not the solution to the problem, and it's not the human being thinking of the solution. So organizations need to become digital, meaning that they need to look at their processes and see how digital technology will make it more efficient, will drive innovation, etc. They need to digitize their people, meaning they need to teach their people how to be digital savvy. They need to create opportunities for their people to interact with technology in a different way. They need to create organizations where ideas thrive, because ideas are how innovation happens. They need to become organizations that keep learning and relearning. One of the critical characteristics of today's organization is that they have become lifelong learners or lifelong reinventors. If you look at organizations, their strategy spans are shorter. Before, we used to do strategies that 5-year strategies, 10-year strategies. These days, we just do like maybe 6 months because you don't know what's going to happen in the environment. So it's more about your ability to reinvent yourself very quickly. And for you to do that, you need to create the environment where that's right. That is something that we're still struggling with as a people.
Adora, I'll interject here and quickly come in. We're fast losing time, and there are a couple of grounds I would like for us to cover. I'd like for you to give some level of assurance to people, especially, people like staff prone to being affected by changes in workplaces. What do they do to align and improve capacity to remain relevant and avoid redundancy?
Personally, you need to, it doesn't matter what age or era you're in, you need to constantly develop yourself. You need to be abreast of the things that are happening around you. You need to find avenues to grow yourself. So people need to learn, people need to train themselves. People need to know that being digitally savvy is not just for work, it's for life. Because everything you're doing today, you either have digital channels or you're on the internet, so this is not a skill that you leave for your organization to keep you alone. Right? Now, but however, your organization still has a role to play in bringing you up to speed for the specific work that you do for them.
Okay.
And then the government has a role to play. The government needs to create regulation that enables innovation. The government needs to invest in research and analytics. The government needs to ensure that digital infrastructure is available to everybody, no matter where they are. The government needs to enable supplementary infrastructure such as electricity, and healthcare, so that people can thrive, and so that Africa and Nigeria in particular can compete to the rest of the world.
I hear you, Adora. I hear you, but I don't know if you would agree with me, but changing people's mindset is going to be a huge problem as well. Most people are used to a lenient way of working with approval processes and buying necessary along each step of the process. So it's either someone, it's either someone is willing to go the long haul or you're out of the game. Would that be correct?
You're right. So that's what a transformation is about. That's why transformations is not just about systems and processes. Transformations are about people. So it doesn't matter what great strategy you have. It doesn't matter what great processes and systems you have. As long as your people, you've not been able to motivate your people to behave in the way you're trying to get them to behave, then your transformation is already a failure. So the biggest part of the why transformations don't work is if you don't get the people to do it. So organizations need to relook. First of all, leadership is critical today, right? How you embrace diversity, for example. What you make people feel when they come to work. how you reward them, what you reward. Because people are logical, they will do what pays them and not what gives them bad consequences. So organizations need to pay attention to that part of the transformation. In fact, that's the most important part, because that's where mindsets in.
I have keenly listened to you, Adora, and all you've said so far, and I find your thoughts on this matter quite profound. But before I let you go, let's get your final words, especially in light of the pandemic and how that is also throwing up changes in the workplace. I mean, what do you see, and how do we, address some of the situations coming up due to the pandemic, especially in workplaces?
To be honest with you, the pandemic makes me sad in many ways, but professionally, it makes me really, really sad, because a lot of the work I was doing in Nigeria in the past 5 years or thereabouts was on digital transformation. So I was trying to get organizations to move from being legacy organizations to understanding that they live in a digital world, a connected world, and a multi-dimensional world. Unfortunately, COVID happens, and it's catalyzed something. It has catalyzed the paradigm that we were working so hard to catalyze over 5 years ago. Now people now understand why digital technology is critical. Now understand why digital channels are important. Thing as simple as trying to shop and do grocery shopping in Nigeria over the pandemic period was almost impossible. Because we didn't have digital channels, and we hadn't worked out our supply chain to bring the goods to the consumer's doorstep. So a lot of people were left. So part of the problem we had was how do we shut down markets, for example, at times like this? We couldn't do that because a lot of our workforce was out there in the market, and we needed to feed the nation. So what I'm thinking is what COVID has done is, in a way, it's in quotes, a blessing in disguise, because it's forcing us to rethink the way we've been doing things for a long time.
It's almost like a reset button for us. Adora Nebo, I want to thank you so much for joining me. I do know that I disrupted your morning run, and that makes me even more grateful for your participation on the program. Thank you so much indeed. Adora Nebo is the CEO, Chrysalis Consulting Limited, operating out of Massachusetts, USA. Thank you so much for joining us on Insight.
Thank you, Nnamdi, for having me. It's been a pleasure.
At this time, we continue to see families, businesses and countries all contend with overcoming the challenges posed by the coronavirus pandemic, where we're beginning to get some glimpse of light as research is progressing a bit to unravel the invisible enemy. One sector that has been affected severely is education. Across the world, caution is being applied to ensure that schools only reopen in the safest conditions. Where here in Nigeria, a new set of guidelines have been issued for the eventual reopening of schools, but it is contingent on when the pandemic is contained. Professor Rosemary Udozo joins me now in the studio. She's a professor of education administration and planning, University of Abuja. Welcome to Insight, Professor Udozo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nnamdi.
Yeah. Prof, last I heard, COVID-19 has affected more than 1.5 billion people from preschool to tertiary institutions, globally. This number represents more than 91% of the total enrolled learners in the world. By the way, these are figures that I got from UNESCO. For Africa and Nigeria in particular, this is an educational crisis. And I'm sure you've seen the new guidelines released by the federal government on the reopening of schools, eventual reopening of schools. Let's begin with your thoughts on the guidelines and how significantly or sufficiently the provisions cater for safety and the protection of those who will be in the classrooms.
Thank you, Mr. Nnamdi. I read the guidelines. It has 4 focal points, looking at staying at home and learning safely. The second one, before the reopening of schools, what preconditions are required. The third one, the reopening of schools proper. What are the necessary conditions, guidelines that will be put in place? Then the last one, ensuring safety in learning environment when schools eventually reopen. I have gone through that, and I tell you, if all delineated and stipulated in form of policies in the guidelines, if they are put in place and judiciously and sincerely implemented, believe me, we can open schools. Our students can continue with their learning.
So I figured, or rather, I guess you would have noticed the provisions on attendance, social distancing, hygiene, cleaning, and non-pharmaceutical interventions for safe and healthy school activities and programs. Don't you think the prospects of meeting some of these provisos would vary from school to school, and of course, whether they are publicly owned or privately owned as well? Take attendance, for instance, and considering how populated some of our public schools are and the limited spaces, or space rather, in classrooms and stuff. How challenging can an issue like that be?
Very good. The challenges we have right now in reopening schools are more in our public schools. The private schools, yes, they need to implement and comply with the guidelines, but the population within the private school setting are not as high as what we have in public schools. Our public schools have increased population explosion within the last decade, especially in urban setting. The differences we have in semi-urban areas and our rural areas. The problem now is, how do we cope with this large population of schools as far as social distancing is concerned? Because the cross of the guidelines, the cross of the matter right now in our schools is, how do we reduce person-to-person contact in learning environments? How do we provide for social distancing of at least 2 meters, approximately 6 feet between one person and the other? That has been the guideline in banking sector, in the market, in hospitals, in other public places. But the problem is, at the school level, at all levels, it's a continuum. Basic primary schools, that's the primary, the junior secondary, the senior secondary, including the tertiary institutions. Because what happens in public schools cut across the levels. So how do we cope with these challenges in order to reopen schools safely?
Well, Prof, for now, schools are closed, and until they open, we need to keep them engaged somewhat. How can we optimize virtual learning as part of our system? And that's one. Secondly, how can we strike a balance between keeping the schools closed, thereby protecting our children from the coronavirus pandemic, and making sure that they do not regress significantly academically?
Yes, please. I've always said and discussed this. While we wait, long time, school administrators would have taken up salient posting where class teachers, subject teachers collaborate with parents and guardians, keeping these children constantly revising what they were taught. Remember, first term, second term were completed, awaiting third term before the pandemic disrupted the academic programs. Now, what we need to do is figuring out what are other necessary conditions do we adopt, at least to maintain equity in the learning process. Virtual learning, yes. E-learning, yes. But they have their limitations. Not good percentage of our children, our learners, have access to all this. It has to do with ICT. And you know the problems, the challenges of the effectiveness of ICT within our own context. So when I went through the guidelines, the second aspect of the guideline before the school reopens, what do we do? What can we do so that schools can reopen safely? There are conditions. The very first consideration we will give is utilizing facilities within and around the schools so that we ensure social distancing. That's the very first one. Because when the children are clustered in classrooms, we are not talking about any other thing. Face masking or whatever. None will work again. But if we succeed in reducing the number of learners per classroom space, length times width, once we succeed, we will be able to contain these children in physically distant environment for learning. That's the real number one. And how can we do this? Some people say government should build schools. It's not easy to put or construct classroom blocks. It's not what government can do just overnight. It's a long-term planning. Strategically, what can we do now in the present circumstance in order to start? Because I believe and I am convinced that Nigeria cannot afford keeping the children at home any further. We can't. I am a parent and I know what it means, even as a professor, to do it at home. Then you consider the greater percentage of our parents who leave their homes, who go out every morning for their livelihood. Go out in the morning, come back at night. What time do they have to cope the children? To coach them? No. I watched a video. It was a cartoon though. A father wrote Tiger and called the son. Spell this. The boy spelled it correctly. The father said, pronounce it. He laughed and said, biscuit. This is the fear of post-pandemic. If we keep these children longer than necessary, this is what we will experience in schools.
Well,
our standard of education, we were even yearning that it was declining.
Yes, Prof, and it's a challenge already that it's already there. I mean, you just mentioned one. I'll come at you again with some figures, this time from UNICEF. It indicates that in Nigeria, pre-COVID world, 10.5 million children aged between 5 and 14 years were not in school. Similarly, before the global scourge, in northeastern Nigeria, more than 800 schools had been closed. 496 classrooms have been destroyed and 1,392 classrooms damaged. I mean, Professor Udozo, these are out of school numbers alone. I mean, these numbers alone underscore the need for us to be astute in reopening our schools. In your opinion, what is the most important parameter, perhaps a set of rules that must be met to allow for a phase-by-phase partial reopening of schools in Nigeria?
Good. In my own opinion, first thing first, what we need to do, and urgently, is to make arrangements, strategize, and allow those in their exit classes to go back. Especially those writing West African school certificate examinations. If you take the statistical data of the number of students registered for WAEC in Nigeria, you will find out that once they write their exams, they will leave the school premises. They won't be in the school anymore. And the classrooms meant for them will be available for the other one's penultimate class down. The facilities we are looking for social distancing will be automatically made available. Where there are not enough, this is the time school community management should come in. School-community management. The school will now spread out to the community on the resources and facilities within the community to effect and achieve social distancing. Look around FCT, for instance, this Abuja. How many event centers do we have within that are not put into use now? Remember, they have tables, they have seats. One of those, their banquet tables that accommodate 10 adults during wedding parties when the going was good, can accommodate 5 students comfortably and well distanced. And learning can take place there. Learning is between the teacher and the learner. The classroom is just housing this process. It's not the classroom that is giving the learning. It's the teacher and the learners. The only thing is provide physically conducive environment for learning to take place. And in my own opinion, if we want to do this, in urban areas where these event centers abound in their numbers, we can liaise and discuss with their owners, the investors. Let them allow schools to make use of them. Designate particular schools closest so that the walking distance will be reduced. Closest to these event centers. Even in our urban setting, in our rural setting, we have town halls, large. We have social centers, large, to accommodate good number of people. Nothing stops us from bringing some of our students to make use of these facilities so that learning will take place.
Prof,
Schooling will continue.
Well, out of time, like we've talked about schools remaining closed for the foreseeable future. That doesn't make sense, or some sense, to consider the full spectrum of benefits and risks of both in-person and virtual learning options. And how do we balance that as well to ensure that some of our students are not left lagging behind, like kids from indigent homes? I mean, I know you've talked about that earlier. Very quickly, your last words.
Yes, if we still want to, for now, while we strategize, because there are a lot of options. But for the time being, if we want to reach out, continue at the quality level where we left schools, because we left school somewhere. The fear now is, let us not degenerate.
Indeed.
Let us not go below where we left schools.
Prof, I'll just come in here and thank you very much.
Teachers, please, can do us some favors.
Okay.
Classroom teachers, subject teachers should be encouraged to please liaise with parents. Send them salient postings. Summarize your subjects. Send out in form of work SMS. Parents will get them. And I plead with parents, whichever one you receive, don't hold it. Call your children. Supervise. That is your own input. Don't be in the comfort of your living room. Government don't know. Government doesn't know. Those people, they don't know. This person doesn't know what he's doing. No, you as a parent, play your part. I play mine. The government will play his.
Prof, I want to thank you very much for joining me on the program. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Professor Rosemary Udozo is a professor of education, administration and planning, University of Abuja. Thank you so much for coming on Insight.
Thank you very much, Nnamdi.
Up next is Elizabeth Omoruyi for the rest of the program.
Thanks for joining us on the Media Review segment. The role of women in driving the affairs of a nation cannot be ignored. National plans, policies, institutions and budgets are where governments begin to translate commitments to women into practical progress towards gender equality. This is our focus on the media review segment today, and I have with me in the studio Ima Akpan, a community development advocate who is also the coordinator of Buhari New Media Center, Akwa Ibom State, and she will be providing insight. It's nice to have you in our studio, Miss Ima.
Thank you so much, Lizzie. Great to be here.
All right, could you enlighten us on what the center is all about?
Okay, the Buhari New Media Center, the BNMC, is primarily set up to propagate all the projects and programs of the current administration, the administration of Mr. Muhammadu Buhari, to inform the populace of what federal government is doing, to also be an eye for the government of what the people really are saying. And so we serve as a perfect middleman between government and the people.
Okay. I love the fact that you said a middleman.
Yeah.
Public services respond to women's needs and priorities quite slowly. What is your take?
I think in politics and even in governance, women are not adequately represented. Of course, you know, on the table of negotiation, whether in politics or in governance, on that table, what is the percentage of women represented? Talking about the executive arm of government currently, how many women are there? When decisions are made, how many women make input? In the legislature, how many women do we have there? And of course, you know, every sector should be well represented, and your representation can determine really what happens to that sector. And so for the women, we really need to have more of that gender involved in political processes and governance generally. I think that's majorly a factor. And also, we see that the African woman most times is laid back on political issues.
Okay.
But we need to be more vocal. We need to encourage our young girls to participate more, to show more interest in politics, in governance, because in the final analysis, it is what happens, it is what determines the well-being of the society. And so it's very important that women get more involved. And government, of course, should endeavor to get more women, of course, involved in the decision making.
As a media-related organization, how has the organization been able to promote the cause of women?
As a person, coincidentally, I'm the only female coordinator amongst the 36 states in the Federation. And you can see the statistics, the only female. I would have loved to see more female coordinators. And so I use my position not just as a BNMC coordinator, but as an outspoken person in the media space, on radio, on social media, to promote women causes. I try to encourage young girls to be more involved, to be more outspoken, to be more aware of their worth and how to bring this worth to the table of negotiation, whether in governance or in every other aspect of life. And basically that.
The media play an important role in development. And are there areas the organization tends to look at?
Yes.
Especially when it has to do with women.
Yes. Take, for example, the social investment programs of this current administration.
Okay.
Aside from the Empower that focuses a lot on the youth unemployment, the rest of the programs like the school feeding program, where you have vendors that have to cook for the pupils. These vendors are empowered economically to, patronize the traders that are actually there at the grassroots. And so you see, these are the kind of programs targeted at women especially. And then you see trader money. We have more women in the petty trading businesses. And so you see that particular program impacts greatly on women. and many others. I do hope that the public works program just coming up now is going to take is going to capture a large percentage of women involvement in it. I hope to see that.
Okay. You are from the Niger Delta region. Considering the crisis rocking the region right now, how are women really faring?
The story of Niger Delta, for me, over the years, it's a story of it's a sad commentary. I would love to see more positive things happening in my region.
Okay.
The women are actually the worst hit.
Okay.
Regarding any crisis in the Niger Delta region. We've been through a lot. The phases of discovery of crude oil, the phase of exploration and exploitation, and then there came agitation for the supposed for the marginalization of the region to be addressed, and then we saw government respond. Some of those responses came in form of amnesty programs. We've had the 13% derivation funds given to the Niger Delta state, and then we also have the NDDC, the Niger Delta Development Commission, primarily set up to address the agitations of the Niger Delta people. We've seen a lot of issues, health problems, and you know, the environment where you have pollution, and of course this has affected the livelihood of the people. And for me, I feel women are most hit because the women are on the home front. The women are mostly the farmers in the region, and so if the funds in the NDDC, the funds as captured in the 13% derivation fund, even the amnesty program, if it does not reach the women, then we haven't solved the problem.
Okay, let me quickly cut in there. Now that we have a crisis rocking, how will the Buhari new media help women in that area?
Primarily, it is to ensure we keep exposing the rot that is going on there, to attract government attention, to do the needful. We are tired of seeing political decisions that places the people for which these funds should be, you know, targeted at. The people suffer. We will keep, you know, exposing some of these things, and we expect that federal government should step in to ensure that, for example, the forensic auditing is carried out very well, and of course with the controversial issues surrounding the current IMC, the Interim Management Committee. We expect Mr. President to do the needful, enough of leaders who are not sensitive to the plight of the people, enough of the uncontrollable greed, enough of the unusual insensitivity to the people. And going forward, I feel there should be less of a political consideration regarding appointment of people into a board.
Okay.
Whenever Mr. President would deem it fit to bring on board the substantive board, of course, I want to see more professionals given the roles to play. Personally, sometimes I think of Ken Sarowiwa. What would he think about Niger Delta today? What would he say to the present leaders of Niger Delta? Sweat and blood trickled before we were listened to. And so I think there should be less of selfishness amongst our leaders, and more of appointments of people who have the best interest of this
so
region.
what's the way forward for the Niger Delta region?
Look at the funds
in terms of development.
Look at the funds that have come in for over the year, in this past years. If you combine the amnesty program funds with the NDDC funds with the 13% derivation, we should be looking at over 8 trillion.
Okay.
But the region does not reflect. The condition of this region is not commensurate with the investments made so far. Honestly, we do not have reasons to complain because we've had sufficient investment, but it's not reflecting on the life, on the condition, on the lifestyle, or on the lives of the poor people in the region. So going forward, we want to see professional people occupying seats, credible people occupying offices that will ensure that programs and projects meant for the poor really gets down to the poor. Hospitals, schools, social investment programs in the Niger Delta, these are things we need to watch out for, and I want to see them happen in the region.
All right, Ms. Emma, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Very much for providing insight.
Thank you for having me, Lizzie.
Thank you so much. And that's it on the Media Review segment this week.